Welcome back, everyone. Now we are going to move into another part of the industry that, as a participant in the legal industry, we all need to be thinking about. Neil Coole is the director of the food and supply chain at the BSI Group. Neil Coole has worked in the management systems, standards, and certification industry for more than 15 years. Today, he will talk to us about accreditation and what you will need to consider as you aim to have a facility up to the standards to sell product in the legal market domestically as well as internationally. Remember that your screen will go blank for a few minutes, but you do not need to refresh your screen, and we will be back with Neil's presentation shortly. Neil will be unable to join us for the question and answer session today, but please leave your questions for us and he will get the answers back to you after the conference. Again, your screen will go blank for a few minutes and Neil will be joining us soon.
Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar on an introduction to HAACP and GMP for the cannabis industry. The webinar is designed to provide you with an overview of what HAACP and GMP is, how it will help your business to implement the minimum industry requirements from a food safety perspective, and how it will support your organization with the production of cannabis-related products for human consumption moving forward. A quick introduction from me. My name is Neil Coole and I'm the Director for BSI America's Food and Retail Supply Chain. I've been fortunate enough to work in the standards, testing, training and certification industry for the past 21 years, and I'm passionate about supporting organizations who are new to food safety standards and embracing the importance of how training and assessing an organization to an internationally recognized standard will support that organization with current and future business trade. This webinar is focused on supporting the cannabis industry with current industry requirements, so we will start the webinar with a brief introduction to BSI, our history and some of the standards we have made available to industry to date. Together we will cover a top-level overview of some of today's challenges to the cannabis industry, followed by an introduction to the topic of hazard analysis and critical control points, or HAACP, and good manufacturing practices, or GMP, as a minimum industry expectation. Finally, I'll provide you with an overview of some of the solutions that BSI is currently providing to your industry colleagues, followed by some useful links for further information, guidance and support. The British Standards Institution, or BSI, was founded in 1901 as the world's first national standards body, responsible for the development of standards for all industry sectors. BSI was also a founding member of ISO, the International Organization for Standardization, which is when the world agrees, on the 23rd of February 1947 in London. BSI is industry agnostic, focusing on supporting all industry sectors with standards development, training, advisory services, auditing services and software solutions. A question I'm frequently asked is, what is a standard? Well, a standard is effectively industry best practice developed by business for business. BSI has originated many of the world's leading management system standards, which all started life as a British standard before becoming widely renowned as international standards, or ISOs, which are ratified by 163 countries. So why are standards important? Well, standards harmonise, reduce duplication and facilitate seamless international trade. They impact on almost all aspects of our lives. Standards provide the basis for conformity, certification and building trust. And standards help to improve products, process, behaviour and build resilience. BSI has pioneered the development of over 5,300 food and agricultural standards, facilitating business and trade throughout the food and retail supply chain. So why is it important for the cannabis industry to embrace a harmonised standards approach to industry best practice, consumer protection and risk mitigation? Today, the world's most popular quality management standard adopted by industry is ISO 9001, which was originally developed in 1979 as BS 5750 and is now adopted by over 1.6 million organisations around the world today. During its life, ISO 9001 has gone through a number of revisions to ensure that it remains relevant today. It also forms the foundation for several sector-specific quality management system standards such as ISO 13485 for medical devices, IATF 16949 for the automotive industry, and the AS 9100 series of standards for aerospace. All standards are evolving and are regularly reviewed to ensure they reflect the needs of our changing world. BSI has identified a need to create a standard setting the stage for international adoption, with organisations using these standards as best practice, helping them to run more efficiently, saving money and resources. Out of the top 12 most adopted risk management standards in the world today, 10 have originated with BSI. And the list of modern risk management standards continues, with BSI continuing to innovate and support industry for the future. In 2019, the cannabis industry is in a consolidation and expansion frenzy, so growing in a responsible, efficient and effective manner is critical. It is very important to remember that any organisation which needs to build an ethical and trusted reputation on the principles of harmonised and recognised international standards and best practice must first build them on a solid foundation. The cannabis market has a number of challenges today. Some of these are listed here. In addition, there needs to be continued growth in the literacy and understanding of food safety in the edibles market. We see this as especially applicable to CBD and other cannabinoids such as CBG and CBC. Industry perception, adult education and responsible marketing all need to be based on science, credible standards and industry best practice. Labelling and childproof packaging requirements will also need to be rigorous. Businesses will need to have a clearly defined quality management system in place to support the activities of the business, including a defined and tested process for managing product recalls and consumer-related incidents. Edibles and the safety of these products will be under scrutiny, especially if there are food safety or dosage issues with these products. Standardized serving sizes, testing for product authenticity and potency will be crucial, including the ability to provide consumers with the visibility of who made the product and what standards they operated to within their business, which should be independently verified. So whilst it's important for organisations throughout the cannabis industry to understand today's challenges, it's also worth keeping an eye on future industry challenges such as the environmental impacts through wastewater or air emissions or supply chain security risks. In the not too distant future there will be additional industry, customer and regulatory requirements for the cannabis industry. So why is it important to have a solid foundation for your business? Having a solid foundation is as important to your home as it is to your business. Some businesses will focus on the immediate opportunity, quick cash and quick wins, and they can absolutely do this to run a business comfortably for a short period of time. However, at some point in the future they will face an unforeseen challenge, a requirement or impact which will bring the business down around them. Your business is only as strong as the foundation you build it on. Building in resilience to your business will give you the stability to grow long term while sustaining shifts in the ever-changing landscape of the cannabis industry. HAACP and GMP is seen as the industry minimum expectation throughout the food, chemical and pharmaceutical manufacturing industries. For any organisation throughout the cannabis industry who wishes to protect your consumers, your brand, product and integrity moving forward, then it is essential that you understand the importance of embedding an effective HAACP and GMP system. Two important reasons for this is to enable you to provide a level of due diligence to any interested party, regulatory inspector, client or external party. This will support you in being able to demonstrate all reasonable precaution, which is the reasonable exercise of foresight and caution expressed through affirmative action to ensure that food is safe. A comprehensive HAACP plan will help demonstrate all reasonable precaution as you have a plan to produce safe food. All due diligence is the proper conduct of the general food operation, including testing, manufacturing and monitoring to ensure safe food is produced. Due diligence will be demonstrated by retrospective proof of compliance to the HAACP plan through complete and accurate critical control point monitoring records, records of corrective actions and verification activities. As organisations throughout the cannabis industry are required to meet a number of demanding requirements to ensure that products are produced in a safe and responsible manner, and that ultimately these products are safe for their intended use. Hazard analysis and critical control points, or HAACP, is a systematic preventive approach to food safety from biological, chemical and physical hazards in production processes that can cause the finished product to be unsafe, and designs measures to reduce these risks to an acceptable level. In this manner, HAACP attempts to avoid hazards rather than attempting to inspect finished products for the effects of those hazards. The HAACP system can be used at all stages of a food chain, from food production, preparation processes, including packaging, distribution, through to dispensaries. Hazard analysis and critical control points, HAACP, and good manufacturing practices, GMP, are both systems designed to support the safe production of food, chemicals and pharmaceuticals. The concept of HAACP was developed in the 1960s by the Pillsbury Company, while working with NASA and US Army laboratories to provide safe food for space expeditions. The limitations of end product testing became evident to those who were trying to provide the safest possible food products. In order to ensure that food used for space missions would be safe, almost all products manufactured would need to be tested, leaving very little for actual use, so a new process was needed. So now we look at the 7 principles of HAACP. Principle 1, hazard analysis, where the food safety team must conduct a hazard analysis for each product, identifying all potential hazards for the product. Types of hazards include microbiological hazards, chemical hazards, and physical hazards. Microbiological hazards can be dangerous contaminants in your ingredients or products. A common example in the cannabis industry would be mold on an edible product. Chemical hazards would include risks like the use of pesticides and chemical residue on the finished product itself. Physical hazards include those that are introduced during the manufacturing process, for example metal, glass or plastic. Principle 2. Determining the critical control points. A step at which control can be applied and which is essential to prevent or eliminate a food safety hazard or reduce it to an acceptable level. Definition of control measures are actions taken at the critical control point to prevent, eliminate or reduce the hazard. Looking for critical control points in the areas such as raw materials, receiving and handling, processing and distribution. Principle 3. Critical limit definition of critical limits. A maximum or minimum value to which a biological, chemical or physical parameter must be controlled at a CCP to prevent, eliminate or reduce the hazard to an acceptable level. Examples include temperature, time, humidity and pH levels. Principle 4. Monitoring procedures, definition. Scheduled or continuous testing or observation of the control parameters at a CCP to ensure that limits are not exceeded. For example, checking temperatures, sampling raw materials, monitoring pH level, humidity monitoring, and sampling for bacteria. Principle 5. Corrective action procedures. When a critical control limit is exceeded, corrective action is taken to bring the process back into control. The appropriate corrective action must be identified in the HAACP plan, so when a limit is exceeded, it is clear what action must be taken. Goals include to identify the cause of the loss of control, determine the scope of the problem, identify what product was affected and bring it under control, correct the deviation and eliminate the cause, find the root cause itself. When did the control situation begin and what process steps were affected? Principle 6 is verification. Verification that the HAACP plan is valid, implemented as written and working properly. Validate that the critical control limits are sufficient for preventing food safety hazards and demonstrate that hazards are being controlled at the CCP. Principle 7 is documentation and record keeping. The foundation of a HAACP system is a documented plan addressing each of the HAACP principles. Record keeping provides evidence that the activity is being adequately performed and performed according to the documented plan. HAACP records include the HAACP plan itself, hazard analysis, monitoring records and data, testing data and results, records of corrective actions, non-conforming product disposition records, validation records, and audit reports. The purpose of a decision tree is to support the decision-making process of the HAACP team and to help confirm whether the hazard needs greater food safety control. Decision trees are not mandatory elements of HAACP, however they are very useful in helping to determine whether a particular step is a CCP. The correct application of the Codex CCP decision tree relies on understanding the intent of each question, and the purpose of the CCP decision tree is to identify the most appropriate process step for control at each significant hazard. There may be several significant microbiological hazards controlled at one process step, such as thermal processing or cooking. Or there may be several process steps where a significant hazard of foreign matter is controlled, such as the use of magnets, sieves or metal detection. Question 1. Do preventive control measures exist for the significant hazard? The intent of this question is to ensure that there are control measures in place to prevent, reduce or eliminate a hazard as per HAACP. Focus on preventive rather than detection. If there is no control measures required for the hazard, then it is likely that the hazard is not a significant hazard and therefore should not be considered in the CCP decision tree. Question 2. Is a step specifically designed to eliminate or reduce the likely occurrence of a hazard to an acceptable level? This question is asking if the process step, not the control measure, is specifically designed to eliminate or reduce the hazard. Question 3. Could contamination with identified hazards occur in excess of acceptable levels, or could these increase to unacceptable levels? This question is most applicable to microbiological hazards, as contamination with bacteria may increase in excess of acceptable levels if potentially hazardous foods are stored in the temperature danger zone or in a cooling process after cooking that takes too long and may allow for growth and heat-resistant spores. In general, chemical and foreign matter hazards are either present or absent and do not necessarily increase during the manufacturing process. Question 4. Will subsequent process steps eliminate identified hazards or reduce likely occurrence to an acceptable level? The intent of this question is to identify the last point of the control in a process for a significant hazard. This is to ensure that appropriate resources are provided at the most relevant step in the process. For example, a manufacturing site may have multiple inline magnets to prevent foreign matter contamination. However, the last inline magnet is likely to be identified as the CCP for product safety, whereas the magnets at the start of the process are primarily used to protect the manufacturing equipment. However, HAACP should always be implemented with Codex HAACP prerequisite programs, or PRPs, and good manufacturing practices, or GMPs, for food hygiene. For example, supplier approval, staff training, product specifications, cleaning and sanitizing procedures for all food contact surfaces, maintenance of hand washing, hand sanitizing and toilet facilities, pest control measures are just examples. There is a heavy emphasis on compliance with good manufacturing practices, or GMPs, in all relevant food legislation and customer certification standards. The type and number of controls would depend on the specific product, process and food safety risks, the facility and level of implementation, and compliance to the systems in place. The BSI HAACP and GMP certification criteria define specific GMPs that need to be developed and implemented to achieve certification to this standard. BSI HAACP and GMP certification is designed to support you with your understanding and intent of these prerequisites and GMP programs, and will be useful in demonstrating a level of due diligence in all food safety programs moving forward. However, HAACP should always be implemented with Codex HAACP prerequisite programs, or PRPs, and good manufacturing practices, or GMPs, for food hygiene. For example, supplier approval, staff training, product specifications, cleaning and sanitizing procedures for all food contact surfaces, maintenance of hand washing, hand sanitizing and toilet facilities, pest control measures are just examples. There is a heavy emphasis on compliance with good manufacturing practices, or GMPs, in all relevant food legislation and customer certification standards. The type and number of controls would depend on the specific product, process and food safety risks, the facility and level of implementation, and compliance to the systems in place. The BSI HAACP and GMP certification criteria define specific GMPs that need to be developed and implemented to achieve certification to this standard. BSI HAACP and GMP certification is designed to support you with your understanding and intent of these prerequisites and GMP programs, and will be useful in demonstrating a level of due diligence in all food safety programs moving forward. Prerequisite programs are steps or procedures, including good manufacturing practices, or GMPs, which control the operational conditions within a food establishment and promote environmental conditions that are favourable for the production of safe food. Prerequisite programs are the foundation of any food safety or HAACP system. HAACP alone will not ensure safe food production. Prerequisite programs based on Codex principles of hygiene are essential, as these programs are the control measures referenced in the HAACP plan for potential and significant hazards. The type and number of prerequisites will depend on the specific product and process food safety risks, the facility and level of implementation, and compliance to the systems in place. For example, consider the requirement of staff hygiene practices such as hand washing. It is important to understand the what of the requirement. However, it is also very important for your staff to understand the why. If you have 100 staff members who use the restroom during the course of the day, 50 female staff and 50 male staff, 49 of each wash their hands correctly, one from each group does not, then you have 100 staff who have not washed their hands correctly. This is just an example, but an all too common example, where foodborne illness risks occur throughout the food manufacturing supply chain. Another example, this time more specific to the cannabis industry, is where certain chemicals have been used in the manufacturing process of an edible or medicinal product, which still contains chemical residue. So when it's finally in the hands of an end consumer, who may be a vulnerable group or recovering from some form of medical treatment, they then consume a contaminated product which has the potential to harm or even kill them. Food for thought. Next time you're travelling through an airport or busy city and you see a fast food outlet with a touch-screen ordering system, ask yourself the question, how many people before you have used the restroom and then gone to touch the screen to order their food? So now that I have introduced you all on the important topic of HAACP and GMP, and how organisations throughout the cannabis industry need to protect their consumers, products and reputation by embracing the benefits of HAACP and GMP, I will now provide you with a brief overview of the next steps on your journey towards HAACP and GMP. Step number 1 is training. It is very important that you receive training on HAACP and GMP to prepare you for the tasks ahead of embedding a HAACP and GMP system into your organization. Remember, before taking a driving test or sitting an important exam, you first learn how to drive or study the subject matter. HAACP and GMP is no different. So what is the course aim? Well, it's to gain knowledge of the Codex HAACP methodology to develop, document and implement HAACP food safety plans, as well as be able to effectively apply the BSI HAACP and GMP certification criteria. How will you benefit? You'll be able to develop a comprehensive HAACP plan based on the specific risks to your product and process, improve system and process management of food safety through a preventive risk-based HAACP plan, and comply with industry and legal obligations for safe food production. What will you learn? Upon completion of this course, you will be able to apply Codex HAACP food safety risk methodologies, relate Codex HAACP methodology to your company, HAACP plans, and the requirements of the BSI HAACP and GMP certification criteria, and participate in developing and reviewing your HAACP plans moving forward. Who should attend? Anyone who is likely to participate in developing, implementing, and reviewing your HAACP plans, or would like to further their knowledge in food safety risk assessments. Step 2 is certification. The BSI HAACP and GMP certification criteria applies to all businesses in the cannabis industry. This includes growers, manufacturers, distributors, and dispensaries. This system supports all food businesses that do not necessarily require international recognition of their food safety management system, but who need to demonstrate to their suppliers and customers that they have implemented a system of food safety hazard control based on the principles and practice outlined in the hazard analysis and critical control points of HAACP and the system guidelines for its application. This concludes our webinar on how BSI is supporting the cannabis industry on the important topic of HAACP and GMP. Here you will find some useful links for further information, guidance and support on the important topic of HAACP and GMP for the cannabis industry.